Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison. Mr. Ellison, it's great to have you with us. I assume that you were watching that press conference like the rest of us were. Let me just get your immediate reaction to what you heard there from federal and state officials.
Well, it communicates to me that they are serious, that they know they have to address the public and the press, that the questions are coming and they deserve answers. I think it's important for them to assure people that this is not something that's going to get brushed under the rug, that this is a serious matter, and both state and federal criminal justice leaders are digging in deep. I will say that I believe that we will be seeing an expeditious investigation, but at the same time, that may mean days and weeks as opposed to months and years. Sometimes these things really do stretch out, but I don't think that's what we're going to see here. But at the same time, an immediate, imminent outcome, I don't think is what we're going to see, because I think that these professionals are more concerned with getting it right than getting it fast. There is pressure to move quickly, though. I mean, there is some thought that if a charge came, that might slow down some of the protesting. But of course, protesting really should not dictate the speed or the thoroughness of the investigation. But I think that they know that an expeditious investigation is what the public expects.
We'll get to the protests in just a second, but I do have a few questions specifically about what was said in that news conference I want to get your thoughts on. As I mentioned, you heard there the U.S. Attorney say that, we thought we would have another development that I could tell you about. Unfortunately, we don't at this point. I'm curious to get your thoughts. Any insight into what that development that the U.S. Attorney referenced there was?
No, I really couldn't speak on that issue. I will tell you that everybody is gathering every bit of video they can. They're trying to get through all the witnesses who were there. They're trying to see if there's any videotape they don't know about. They're trying to make sure they are doing backgrounds on the individuals involved. They don't have the medical examiner's report, to my knowledge. That might be an important piece of information. And so, it's going according to proper protocols. It's not being delayed at all. It's important for people to know that the Minneapolis police are not investigating the Minneapolis police. That has been moved to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So, no, I don't have any special thing to share about what they had in mind. But I can just tell you that this is a situation where you don't want to go for a quick arrest that might make people feel better about justice and then the case goes south. What you want to do is take the time to make sure that these charges, if they are brought forward, stick. And that will be the important thing.
As you're probably aware, a lot of people who have already watched the 7-minute video of the police officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd say that in itself constitutes excessive force. You can bring a charge against the police officer and still gather evidence. Those two are not mutually exclusive. That happens all the time. People are arrested, they're charged, and more evidence comes to light. The idea, though, that he has not been yet arrested has a lot of people concerned that there may be an attempt to find a justification why a charge has not been brought. I mean, Michael Freeman just said right now in the news conference, he said there is evidence that does not support a criminal case.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I heard that statement, too. I don't think that what he meant is that there's evidence of exoneration. I think that what he's saying is that he knows that clever defense counsel are going to try to poke holes at every single, and he wants to make sure that every single one of them is firm. I mean, imagine for a moment, if you were defending this case, they might throw a lot of stuff out there, and you as a prosecutor want to be able to address every one of those things. So that, I think, is really what he was referring to.
All right, let me ask you then about the protest tonight. Obviously, as you mentioned, as others have mentioned, in the absence of any kind of meaningful, step forward by the law enforcement officials, people are still rightfully angry about how this has played out. How are officials in that state going to keep the peace tonight? What is the onus of responsibility on law enforcement and city officials and state officials this evening?
Well, first of all, we want to appeal to people to protest peacefully, to understand that, the cause of George Floyd is noble and just, and getting real justice for him is the right thing to do. And then bringing forth systemic, sustainable change is the right thing to do. And that, so peaceful, powerful, militant protest is absolutely appropriate. But when the conversation gets diverted to, broken windows and broken things, that is not helpful to the cause. I will say this, there is some disturbing video of some man dressed in all black with a face mask and an umbrella. He doesn't look like any protester I have ever seen. I am concerned that there may be provocateurs in the crowd who are doing a lot of the damage. I say to the protesters, if you see suspicious people doing damage and they're not carrying signs, they're not chanting, they're just breaking stuff and trying to hide their identity, take pictures of these people. They're not helping you. They're not helping the cause. They're online. There's a YouTube video of one guy, and I urge all the protesters, don't let somebody tear down the good reputation of your righteous protest. Take pictures of these people who may well be provocateurs. And that evidence is on YouTube. I urge people to take a look at it and see if they can identify that guy.
We know that the 4 officers involved in that situation obviously now have been fired. Minneapolis police policy does actually say that officers have a, quote, duty to intervene if they see excessive force being used. Did the other officers at this scene fail in this duty? I mean, you have innocent bystanders who are watching this say he cannot breathe, and the police officer, not the one involved in putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd, but the others, they're not even intervening.
Well, the truth is the victim was saying, I can't breathe. Onlookers were saying he can't breathe. I mean, it looked very apparent to me that the man could not breathe. He said, my stomach hurts, my whole body hurts. He says, they're going to kill me. He said so many things that seemed very clearly to indicate that he was in distress and needed to have that knee off of his neck and get assistance. Didn't happen. And it was very disturbing, very disturbing. It's why this particular case has really captured, the attention of the nation, because just seems like just such a callous disregard of human life. And that's what's in front of all of us. We all are seeing it. We're all witnessing it, and we're all haunted by it.
And we should also note, as we heard there from the U.S. Attorney, both the Attorney General and the President of the United States are being briefed on this as well. It has certainly captured the attention of people, not just in this country, but around the world. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, sir, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.